This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The UK has surpassed Italy to record the highest death toll from COVID-19 in Europe. Coronavirus infections rise in Africa as some countries lift partial lockdowns imposed to stem the spread. And in our continuing series on COVID-19 in Africa, we focus on how the crisis has affected Africa's transport industry. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, Nigeria amends its 2020 budget to assume the price of oil at $20 a barrel. And the English Professional Footballers Association ponders changes to the game if football is to return in mid-June. We begin with the latest figures on COVID-19. Confirmed cases worldwide have surpassed 3.6 million. More than 250,000 people have died. The U.S. has registered over 2,400 deaths in the past 24 hours, with a total now topping 71,000. The U.K. has recorded nearly 700 new deaths, with a total approaching 30,000. This means Britain has now overtaken Italy as the European country with the most deaths. Spain has seen most of the cases in Europe. Italy ranks second both in the number of cases and deaths on the continent. Russia has seen daily new cases of over 10,000 for the third consecutive day. Its total cases top 150,000. The Chinese mainland reported 2 new infections on Tuesday. Both are imported cases. Well, the UK has surpassed Italy to record the highest death toll from COVID-19 in Europe. Official figures put the number of fatalities at more than 32,000. The government says the country is past the peak of infections, but serious challenges remain. Nicole Johnston reports from London.
The worst death toll in Europe, the second highest in the world. More than 32,000 people have died in the UK from COVID-19, including deaths in hospitals and care homes. And what does the government have to say about it?
We've never experienced anything like this first stage of COVID-19 in terms of the scale of the lives lost, but also the lockdown that it has required. And as we go forward, we want to make sure that the next phase is more comfortable, is more sustainable, and prevents lasting damage to jobs and livelihoods.
Last week, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the country is past the peak of infections. The daily death toll appears to be falling. And Johnson is expected to announce plans to start easing the lockdown on Sunday. And the country's chief scientific officer has admitted the UK should have increased its testing capacity much earlier.
I think if we'd managed to ramp testing capacity quicker, it would have been beneficial. And, for all sorts of reasons, that didn't happen.
But it's too late for airlines like Virgin Atlantic. It's announced it's cutting more than 3,000 jobs, will reduce its fleet to 35 aircraft and end their operations from Gatwick Airport. Last week, British Airways and Ryanair also announced thousands of job cuts. Meanwhile, the UK has started trialling a new COVID-19 tracing app on the Isle of Wight. The public will start downloading it on Thursday.
If we can get just half of islanders who've got smartphones to be using this app, then we could be the first place in Britain to get rid of this virus prior to getting rid of this virus throughout our nation, or certainly minimising it as much as possible. Because what we know is, what we have at the moment isn't alive.
Across the UK, many people will be thinking the same thing. Stuck indoors, with jobs disappearing. Indeed, it's not much of a life. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
U.S. President Donald Trump says more lives could be lost as states start to reopen their economies. The president visited a mask factory in Arizona on Tuesday after being confined to the White House for much of April. Giles Gibson reports from Washington.
US President Donald Trump was back on the road on Tuesday, narrowly avoiding a handshake with the governor of Arizona. He didn't wear a mask as he toured a mask factory in the state, where some stores will start reopening on Friday. Speaking to ABC News, President Trump acknowledged lives could be lost in reopening the country.
It's possible there will be some, because you won't be locked into an apartment or a house or whatever it is, but at the same time, we're going to practice social distancing, we're going to be washing hands, we're going to be doing a lot of the things that we've learned to do over the last period of time.
Back in Washington, US senators are returning to Congress and a new normal. Committee hearings are now socially distanced.
I have to say,
Senators pulling down their masks when they need to ask questions. Authorities in New York also added more than 1,600 deaths in nursing homes to the state's coronavirus figures on Tuesday. Many of the victims had not received a confirmed diagnosis, but are now presumed to have died from COVID-19. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo says the situation in the state is still steadily improving.
You see the overall total hospitalizations is down, change in intubations is down, that's good news, and the number of new hospitalizations is also down.
The nursing home figures, though, add to the growing sense that the national death toll, now approaching 71,000, could be even higher. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
In Wuhan, the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic of China, high school seniors have returned to school on Wednesday morning. Wuhan reopened its first batch of 121 high schools 10 days after the city announced itself clear of COVID-19 patients, with over 57,000 senior students returning to school. All students lined up to enter the school, keeping a distance of more than 1 meter. They need to wear masks and receive temperature checks before entering classrooms. Some schools are conducting emergency drills in case any fever patient is discovered. South Africa's head of state, Cyril Ramaphosa, has warned that the worst is yet to come in regards to the spread of COVID-19. The president was speaking after a guided tour to sites identified as coronavirus facilities in the country's KwaZulu-Natal province. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela brings us more on this story.
KZN province is one of the hardest hit provinces here in South Africa with the coronavirus pandemic. The province has the third highest number of COVID-19 cases out of 9 provinces here. President Cyril Ramaphosa has visited the province to assess the identified COVID-19 health facilities and a quarantine center. The president commended the provincial government for remarkable health strides, but cautioned that more needs to be done in preparation for the anticipated high rise in infections.
I'm afraid we've got to plan for the worst, and we are informed that the worst is still coming. We are going to get more people infected, but the important thing is that we need to ensure that we lessen the pace through which these infections are going to take place.
KZN province has had to shut down some health institutions due to high infections of healthcare workers at those facilities. Since then, the provincial government has set up its own economic relief fund aside from the national one as part of scaling up its response to the outbreak. Other measures include the designation of some hospitals for the purposes of managing COVID-19. The Agricultural Royal Showgrounds now operate as quarantine or isolation facility for patients. The president toured these facilities to ensure that the province continues to scale up its efforts to deal with the coronavirus.
The next challenge is the economic one. COVID-19 has brought about a total destruction of our economy. Our economy, as we speak now, is under a great deal of stress and challenge. We now collectively must respond to how we're going to rebuild that economy, reposition that economy.
President Ramaphosa believes that the pandemic offers South Africa a chance to create new sectors of the economy with enhanced ways of doing business. and to use this period to clean the country.
We now need to embark on a massive, massive campaign countrywide to clean up South Africa, to deal with issues like waste dumps that are in wrong places, and hygiene, and clean up the streets of our country and the rural areas as well.
The president further urged the provincial leaders to increase the number of beds to accommodate patients as the province is highly populated. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
There are now more than 49,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus and over 16,000 recoveries across Africa. The death toll stands at nearly 2,000. Of the 54 African countries, only Lesotho is yet to record a case. A number of countries are imposing stricter measures as the virus spreads. Here in Kenya, the government is carrying out mass testing in high-risk areas. With no data showing how far the disease has spread in Kenya, some experts are urging the government to rethink its decision to reopen restaurants. Meanwhile, some key activities are slowly resuming in countries like Nigeria, Tunisia and Ghana after the government eased some restrictions. But the World Health Organization has warned that relaxing measures without boosting care could lead to a new spike in coronavirus cases. Now, as African governments lift partial lockdowns imposed to stem the spread of coronavirus, there is concern over a surge in the number of new infections. In Egypt, the Ministry of Health has announced 388 new COVID-19 cases, the highest daily increase since the beginning of the outbreak. Nigeria has also recorded its highest single daily infection rate of COVID-19 on the day it began a 6-week phase-out period of the emergency lockdown measures. For more on this, let's now cross to CGTN's Adel Mahroui. He's joining me from Cairo, and Deji Badmus in Lagos. Adel, to you first, though, it does appear that the country could be approaching the peak of coronavirus infections. What are health authorities in Egypt saying?
No one can tell yet if we are near the peak or approaching it, but we're definitely going and heading there. Egypt has reported 388 cases yesterday. That's the highest single day number of new cases reported on a daily basis, and therefore an indication to what is going on. Now, the government says that the recent increase in the number of daily infections is due to 2 weeks back when citizens rushed to markets and the streets trying to purchase, buying goods and food before the holy month of Ramadan, which is one of the months that sees high spending rates in Egypt. But still, it is still an indication that there is the uphill trend is still ongoing, and Egypt is approaching higher numbers every day. There are expectations that these numbers will still increase. The Prime Minister, in his speech 2 weeks ago, he says that within the coming 3 to 4 weeks, he's expecting to see the numbers going up. However, he has never mentioned seeing the figures going up to 380 a day, approaching 400, which is in previous statements has been described as a catastrophic figure. Still, the government insists it is quite prepared to accommodate for more COVID-19 cases. There has been advice now that most of the cases will be tend to be taken care of remotely. The health ministry says that it is following up with 900,000 Egyptians. Those are people who came in direct or indirect contact with COVID-19 cases who tested positive. A huge number that is only getting increasing, that increases every day as more cases are confirmed.
Well, Deji, police in Lagos are arresting people as they enforce the curfew. What is it like there?
Well, of course, just in line with the guideline now released by the government, people are supposed to come out between the hours of 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. Markets, for instance, are supposed to close at 3 p.m. and then everybody should begin to make it back to their various homes. Of course, the curfew begins around 8 p.m. It's an overnight curfew from 8 p.m. now to 6 a.m. But what we've seen the past 2 days now that the ease-ins actually had been on for, we've seen situations where people basically disobey the guidelines, and some people, of course, break the curfew, and that's the reason why the police has made quite a number of arrests. Yesterday, the police said it had arrested around 179 persons. Now, not just people breaking the curfew now, even people who don't use the face mask. That's quite a worry because, yes, the guideline is that people must use. It's mandatory for people to use the face mask in public. But what we have seen is that you see quite a number of people who actually don't use them. Of course, a lot of people use them, but you still find people who don't use the face mask at all. And for authorities, this is quite surprising because in some places, some of these face masks have actually been distributed for free now. So why people are actually not using them and complying with the guidelines is actually a surprise. And that's the reason why the police is now cracking down on those who refuse to use the face mask and those who break the curfew. Right. And the police has said it's going to continue. Anyone who breaks the curfew would be arrested, and for people who do not use their face mask, they will be arrested as well. That is not going to be easy, especially with the use of the face mask. Quite a number of people don't use it.
All right, Adele, Egypt is reopening its hotels, and given the risk of a further spread of the virus, what measures have been put in place to regulate hotel operations and actions from the tourism sector?
So despite the increasing number in infections, Egypt sees that it is time to gradually open the country, to lift restrictions gradually. As you've said, hotels have been allowed to reopen, not yet, but by mid-May, they will be allowed to operate partially. There is a ceiling on occupancy rate that will begin with 25% at the most. There are many measures taken for hotel regulations. For example, no events will be held, so no nightclubs, no weddings will be held in halls, and no open buffets, for example, nothing that brings people together. Dining will be regulated in separate tables, 2 meters between each table and the other, 1 meter between each chair on the same table. There will be disinfectants and sterilization efforts taking place on hourly basis in all hotels, or at least the hotels that will apply for that partial reopening that will start by mid-May. Every hotel will be obliged to have a medical staff. Every hotel will have to have a specific area, a floor, a section, a remote building that will be dedicated to COVID-19 cases. If any have been detected, then this will be the quarantined area within each hotel. And there will be daily communication between the Tourism Ministry and the Health Ministry to try to maintain regulations on that. Now, hotels, in light of having a full travel ban or lockdown, hotels will be mainly serving local Egyptians, and therefore it will be quite a challenge for hotels to see an incremented increase in the cost, as occupancy rates are little, more healthcare facilities will be paid off, and therefore the prices might not be as easy.
Right. So, Deji, a quick comment from you, though, because the easing the lockdown in Nigeria is a tough balancing act, balancing between safety over expediency. What measures is the government putting in place to keep the infection rates down and help the economy get back on track at the same time?
Well, Beatrice, part of the measure is the imposition of that curfew, the overnight curfew now between 8 p.m. now and 6 a.m. And other measures, of course, that the government has taken is basically ask people to take responsibilities for their action, to demonstrate responsibility at this time. For instance, markets are not, markets operate now. Markets actually open on alternate days. Like today, for instance, is the day for the non-food market. Yesterday was the day for food market. So they'll be operating like that from Monday to Saturday. So it's not as if all the markets are open today. So non-food markets are open today, and then tomorrow the food markets will be open. Then for offices, what the government has said is that it's compulsory for every office, whether big or small, to provide hand washing facilities, hand sanitizers, and to also provide to ensure that their staff use the face mask, and to ensure they maintain social distancing as well at work. Of course, social distancing is a big problem, especially at our markets. It's difficult to implement that. But the use of face mask is very important, and that's the reason why the government is driving hard on those who are not using it, because the government believes if people could just comply, especially with the use of face masks, it just might be able to prevent the widespread of the infection.
Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos, and Adel Mahrui in Cairo. To you both, thank you. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. We return our continuing series on COVID-19 in Africa. We focus on how the crisis has affected Africa's transport industry.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
And now to our continuing series on the impact of the coronavirus in Africa. Today, we are focusing on how the crisis has affected Africa's transport sector. The ban on air travel has had far-reaching implications on the aviation industry across Africa. Among the hardest hit are the little-known baggage handlers who offer crucial services. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam was at the Abuja International Airport, where she spoke to a baggage handler whose job and future now hang in the balance. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam tells us more.
The Abuja International Airport has never been so deserted. As one of the biggest in West Africa, it has an annual capacity of 15 million passengers. But government has since shut operations here to contain the spread of COVID-19.
What the airport authority said that everybody is going to be on lockdown until the federal government call us to resume work. So we are still waiting for them to call us. So far, so good. Since this coronavirus pandemic is arrived, so I have not been doing anything. I only assist my wife in her shop. As far as you know that we cannot be able to work, we cannot earn salary, and once we cannot go outside, there's nothing you can do to earn money, and you are spending money.
Several organizations have been laying off workers as economic activity dips. That has been the case for aviation worker Tijani Abdulrahman, and chances of securing another job are bleak.
So I was stuck before, but due to I make like 2 to 3 contacts with some the MDs and the shareholders, of which they promised me before this coronavirus breakdown.
The Nigerian aviation sector alone is estimated to have lost $170 million. In order to cushion the aviation industry, the Central Bank of Nigeria announced an intervention facility of $338 million. Whether or not this will translate into employment gains for Bashir and Tijani is another issue altogether. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Airlines in Africa and the Middle East have incurred losses running into billions of dollars since the coronavirus pandemic was declared. This is according to the International Air Transport Association. IATA now wants African governments to take action by providing airlines with funding, loans and tax relief. Middle Eastern carriers have lost $19 billion in revenue this year, up from $7.2 billion on March the 11th. And African airline losses so far remain at $6 billion. Will African airlines survive? Angelo Coppola spoke to IATA's Vice President for Africa and the Middle East, Mohamed Bakri.
The financial impact of the coronavirus on continental airlines has been significant. 180 countries implemented measures that limited airline operations and grounded 95% of all global traffic.
For the African continent, that figure has been updated to $6 billion losses of revenues. Now, these $1 billion actually are much needed revenues for the African carriers to stay alive.
Besides cargo planes, the only people flying around the African continent are people returning to their home countries. However, the future for airlines remains uncertain.
Once lockdowns start getting lifted, you're going to start seeing that the domestic operations are going to get going a little bit quicker than the regional and international operations. And I think that largely depends on the fact that each state will probably be looking at its neighboring states as well as international states to say, what is the risk of the coronavirus being still transmitted if I start to open my borders?
In the meantime, authorities may need to get directly involved in ensuring that the airlines can take to the skies again.
The initial ask really was devised and formulated around three main pillars. First pillar is capital injection. We really need to inject immediate capitals, to those airlines. We also encourage governments and financial institutions to, be more flexible and offer loans and loan guarantees and loan bonds to enable these airlines to carry out their duties. And last but not least, tax relief.
Restarting an airline isn't a quick process. While staff would be raring to go and aircraft are generally being maintained, it's the service providers that become the focus of attention.
You must remember that fuel has been sitting in a pipeline and not been moving for a long time. So they're going to have to get that fuel pipeline going, flush it out, get it all ready, or make sure that the fuel is all on spec before you start operating. And then you obviously got to get all the other service providers activated.
On a continental level, more cooperation is needed.
We need the governments to come to us and work with all the stakeholders, airlines, and all the other international and regional associations and local associations to participate in building a unified industry restart plan.
The airline industry is in a complete state of turmoil at the moment, and that's due to the lockdowns in the many different countries. Once those lockdowns are done away with, we're going to see a different airline industry in the region and on the continent. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Freight forwarders and cargo clearing agents in Zimbabwe have been hit hard by the drastic slowdown in the movement of international shipments due to the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya spoke to one freight company that has seen a 70% reduction in activity.
Only critical operations staff are reporting for duty at Freight World to process clearance documents for a few remaining inbound shipments. Exports are virtually at a standstill, leaving the company operating at a fraction of its capacity.
20 to 30% of our normal business. We are basically clearing essential cargo, foodstuffs, mining chemicals, mining space, basically. Yet on a normal day, everything else, Zimbabwe is reliant mostly on imports. So a lot of imports have stopped at the moment. Most of the goods that are coming in are goods that were on the seas, on the high seas, before this corona became a big problem. So these are like orders that were placed before, which are now still coming in and they could not be stopped.
Once they've all been delivered, there might not be any big shipments for some time, dimming the prospects for a business that thrives on free-flowing international trade.
If the situation remains as it is, obviously companies will close. There's a lot that will happen downstream. Yes, we have the essential goods coming in, but that only covers a small percentage of the total imports or exports out of Zimbabwe. So if it remains like this, it looks gloomy.
For now, the company is holding on, but if the coronavirus-induced disruptions continue, it's not sure for how much longer.
For a month, we'll be able to cope. We may be able to pay salaries, but after a month, it can be a problem.
This industry isn't the only one taking a hammering. The Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, which represents local manufacturers, recently said more than 80% of its members could not afford to pay salaries beyond 1 month. It's appealed to the government to ease some of the lockdown restrictions to allow housebound employees to return to work so they can get this economy ticking again. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's now go to Somalia, where there are concerns that the country's COVID-19 cases and deaths remain underreported as a result of many challenges, including the country's limited testing capacity. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello is in the capital, Mogadishu, and sent us this report.
Somalia is among the nations in Eastern Africa with the highest number of coronavirus infections and deaths. Health officials say they've noticed a spike in the number of cases, despite the country's limited testing capacity.
We have confirmed 34 positive cases of the coronavirus, 26 male and 8 female. 27 are in the Benadir region and 7 in Puntland. We have recorded 756 positive cases so far. We have 3 new deaths, raising our figure to 35, while recoveries now stand at 61.
The country has 1 treatment unit for critically ill patients. The Maritini Hospital in Mogadishu is the only designated government hospital with a 46-bed capacity in a city with a population of more than 3 million people. With the surge of deaths in recent weeks, local authorities say they are unable to confirm probable cause of all deaths, insisting that all deaths in the city will now be attributed to COVID-19.
Every government agency is tasked with a specific role. The Benadir Regional Administration's role is to monitor the number of burials taking place on a daily basis. We've recorded 22 to 44 deaths on any given day across 5 different burial sites since 19th April to now. Our figures indicate that almost 500 have died. We have other burials taking place in separate cemeteries, but we don't get that data.
Over the weekend, Turkish military planes landed at the Aden Abdullah Airport carrying medical aid and Turkish-made ventilators. Like many other countries, Somalia has been suffering from a severe shortage of life-saving equipment as it battles coronavirus.
Today we received a consignment consisting of ventilators, testing and protective equipment. Ventilators are very useful and will allow sick patients to breathe. We are grateful to Turkey for providing us with this aid at this critical time.
Several countries including China, Italy, the United Arab Emirates and Turkey have shipped in tons of medical aid to assist Somalia in efforts to combat the coronavirus. Experts say the aid is critical in boosting the country's health capacity that has been weakened by decades of conflict. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
An investigation has been launched into operations of Tanzania's national laboratory after President John Magufuli questioned his country's coronavirus numbers. The director of the facility and a senior official responsible for COVID-19 testing have both been suspended after authorities denounced alleged irregularities at the laboratories. President Magufuli said that people who tested positive for the virus may not be sick and cast doubt on the credibility of equipment and technicians. He said he secretly ordered the testing of samples from a variety of animals, fruits and vehicle oil. They all came out positive. A committee has been formed to look into the lab's systems, and Tanzania has so far reported over 450 cases of the virus, including 16 deaths. It is one of the few countries in Africa that have not taken extensive measures against the virus. Schools and universities have been shut, but however, markets, bus stops and shops remain busy as usual. Tanzania is in talks with Madagascar to get a herbal mixture that the island nation claims cures COVID-19 patients within 10 days.
I totally agree with the initiative taken by our president, since he is making people feel less worried about this epidemic. Let us focus on praying so that this disease can go away.
The coronavirus epidemic shouldn't be the reason for us not working. What is important is for the government to take strict measures, especially on precautions for citizens to take. We need to be active for us to bring development in our country.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Nigeria amends its 2020 budget to assume the price of oil at $20 a barrel. And some businesses reopen in Uganda as the country eases restrictions in some sectors amid an extended lockdown.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Nigeria's government is amending its 2020 budget to assume an oil price of $20 per barrel. Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed also says that Nigerian oil and gas projects will be delivered much later than originally planned due to upstream budget cuts. Nigeria's economy emerged from a recession in 2017. It was already contending with low growth of around 2% before oil prices plummeted. Africa's top oil exporter relies on crude sales for around 90% of foreign exchange earnings and more than half of government revenue. Global crude oil prices have plummeted in the last few months. In March, the finance minister said the budget would be cut and the initial assumed oil price of $57 per barrel would be reduced. And staying in Nigeria, officials have announced that the oil and gas industry will not hold bidding rounds for major oil fields until crude prices recover. The continent's largest oil producer has been grappling with a significant drop in oil prices and a collapse in global fuel demand caused by lockdown measures. This follows the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Jen Keo has this report.
In 2010, Nigeria enacted the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act to boost dominance in the oil and gas industry. With the recent increase in developments, the country has managed to phase out the supremacy on the continent by international operating companies.
All engineering design, conceptual, front-end, detailed engineering design were done outside the country. But today as we speak, 80% of all engineering design in the oil and gas industry is done in country, which is a major achievement. You can imagine the capital flight when we did all those kind of design outside the country.
Extraction of oil and gas requires precision, leaving little room for error. This has often forced the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board to lean on the international operators to ensure they did not engage in a practice known as fronting.
Oil companies used to give people work and tell them to go and sit at home. So they will come and claim that I've employed 20 people from the community, but we don't have space for them to work. So we just pay them at the end of the month. That's damaging to humanity.
The transformative legislation has allowed the country to retain highly skilled professionals and ensure that the Nigerian operators can now compete with the best in the world.
The IOCs, I will say, trust the work we produce from our yard. They trust us for the quality, they trust us for the schedules, they trust that we will do these works, we'll build this equipment under the strongest safety conditions, because what they want to see is everybody who comes to work every day return home safe at the end of the day.
Despite the recent development in the sector, revenues are expected to decline owing to the recent coronavirus outbreak. With the country heavily relying on crude oil sales, it has been forced to assume a lower petroleum price of just $20 per barrel. Jin Keo, CGTN.
Well, Egypt is finalizing plans and regulations for hotels to reopen as it battles the coronavirus pandemic. COVID-19 has hit the country's tourism sector the hardest, with losses estimated to exceed $2 billion. Partial operation is expected to lift some of the financial pressures. CGTN's Adel Mahroui reports.
Primarily projected to be the best year in tourism revenues, under the pandemic, 2020 could now be the worst. Tourists have initially started to book trips in November. Until they arrive, the government has decided to reopen hotels for locals.
The government prohibited layoffs of hotels and tour operators on the condition that it will pay for that cost. The country is capable of paying for a month or two, but what if the pandemic lasts longer? That is why we move towards partial resumption of hotels and operations.
Hotels will be restricted to a 25% occupancy rate. Visitors will not be allowed to cluster, so open buffets, nightclubs or entertainment activities will not be allowed.
It is not enough. The hotel will be burdened with overheads and fixed costs. When the feasibility study is made for the hotels, we put a risk factor, and that brings their break-even at 60% occupancy, so 25% is unreal. But it's better than nothing, and it's also an opportunity for the staff to get trained.
In addition, hotels must hire a full-time medical staff trained for COVID-19. Rapid tests must be available, and disinfection measures to people and facilities will take place on hourly basis.
I would have wished that the opening of the hotels would be implemented after we have formed a detailed procedures manual that would dictate what will the receptionists do, how will the housekeeping work, how will we manage the public spaces, will pools be working or not.
The government is still working to draft the regulations guidelines for operation while COVID-19 threats persist. Hotels interested in taking these additional necessities can apply to join this partial reopening program. With a 25% occupancy rate ceiling, additional hygienic and preventive measures, running costs for hotels are going to be phenomenal. So instead of offering price cuts to attract clients, many may need to increase them, which will be a challenge to appeal to local visitors who have been suffering from the recession COVID-19 caused. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Uganda has extended its lockdown for 2 more weeks, but also eased restrictions on some sectors of the economy. Restaurants, wholesalers, motor vehicle mechanics and legal practitioners have been allowed to resume work, but with strict prevention measures. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
A gradual return to the new normal. Uganda has been under partial lockdown for more than 45 days, but parts of the economy are starting to reopen.
The criteria is premised on the following issues. Number one is contribution to the economy or the economic impact, and potential to mitigate the risk based on the sector activities and crowding. 3, the socio-economic vulnerability. And finally, expanded capacity for surveillance, testing, and care as more sectors are opened.
In downtown Kampala, business is gradually picking up, but authorities and business owners are still concerned about the spread of COVID-19, so it could take a while for all the shops here to reopen. For now, some key sectors remain closed. Travel by public transport or private vehicles is still banned, and schools and entertainment centers will remain to stay shut to prevent large gatherings. But as the government relaxes the measures, there has been a spike in imported cases. So the reopening has drawn mixed reactions from the public.
As far as the disease is spreading, it is safe for us to keep home. But then the major thing disturbing Ugandans is income. Ugandans are very poor, and it's really pushing everyone down.
They allow these people to move anyhow. This disease may increase, and these people, most of the people, they may die.
To extent wasn't be bad, but in my view was like he would let people work, but he would be putting some measures that everyone should be checked.
Uganda has recorded low numbers of coronavirus. To keep it that way, authorities are doing mass testing of transit truck drivers, border communities and also policing unchecked border points. They hope that these and other measures will help curb the spread of the disease and prevent the need for yet another lockdown. Hilara Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. We speak to South African writer Zukiswa Warner, a winner of this year's GOT Medal Award by the German government.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Women in Sudan are celebrating as they await the ratification by transitional authorities of the ban on female genital mutilation. The country's cabinet has already approved amendments to the criminal code that will punish those who perform the operation with up to 3 years in prison and a fine. The practice has long been viewed as a rite of passage for girls and a way to preserve their chastity. According to the United Nations, nearly 9 out of 10 females in the country fall victim to the practice. Rights groups have for years decried FGM as barbaric. They say it has countless complications and in the worst cases, the girls die. Sudan is in the process of a political transition following the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir early last year. A new administration is now steering the country through social, economic and political changes. Hakam Ibrahim was 7 when, like most Sudanese girls, she became a victim.
Female genital mutilation is one of the very harmful traditions. It's almost as sacred as the Sharia or the law currently in force. Before, people would get henna tattoos, cheer and celebrate to mark a genital cutting.
Our mothers and grandmothers believe that female circumcision is a kind of a pleasure and creates a happy married life for the girl. But it is among the bad customs.
A South African writer, publisher and curator, Zukiswa Warner, has become the first African woman to be awarded the GOT Medal, an official honor awarded by the German government. Founded in 1955, the award is conferred by the German Institute on individuals who have made an outstanding contribution to international cultural exchange. Here's Zukiswa's story.
Zukiswa Warner, I am South African from my dad's side. My mom is Zimbabwean and I was born in Zambia, and I'm now staying in Kenya. The people in Europe perhaps sometimes want a certain type of African story. The stories that I was writing resonated more with this continent, and I wanted my books more on the continent, so that's my big emphasis. In 2018, the Goethe Institute invited me to give them an idea of a new literary idea. And I said, well, you know, we don't have enough writing for 13 to 19-year-olds. I did a call out for stories, for short stories for young adults. And we got 435 stories from 28 African countries. Selected 17 stories from 13 African countries. And each of the stories, you know, the English ones were translated into French and Kiswahili, the French into Kiswahili and English, the Kiswahili into English and French. The first thing that I started doing was artistic encounters. What I had in mind was finding a way of making people more aware of the literature of this continent by writers from this continent. And so in it, I engaged a prose writer or a poet from this continent, and they'll be put together with say a musician or a dancer or an actor. And in this way, people realized that our literature is accessible. I've been shortlisted for the Commonwealth before. I've won an award for my writing, but this particular, the Goethe Medal, is encompassing, you know, my writing. It's encompassing my curation, my publishing, and my editing. So essentially, my whole career. I hope it will say, be true to yourself. Just be true to yourself, and your work will shine through, which is what I've consistently tried to do.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. English Professional Footballers Association